I have quite a lot of stuff to show you today, so, well, let's just get into it. I guess let's start with what I'm wearing. I'm in my puff tee, which is a pattern by Knitting for Olive, and it's one of my favorite patterns. I highly recommend it. I actually have two of these, and the only reason I haven't done a third one is because I keep telling myself that there are a lot of beautiful patterns out there, and it's going to be kind of redundant to just make the same garment for the third time instead of trying all of those other designs. So yeah, but if you haven't done one before, I highly recommend this pattern. In my last podcast, I mentioned that September wasn't that good to me. Nothing went according to plan. And I was really excited for October, for the cozy knitting and autumn weather and just my plans in general. But then at the beginning of October, I got laid off my job of 4.5 years, which came absolutely out of nowhere. And I thought about whether to include this, whether to talk about this or not, but then I decided I kind of should, because we don't knit in a vacuum. We don't do our hobbies in a vacuum. We either do it to unwind and relax or to express ourselves creatively when we can't actually do that in other areas of our life. And also we do it as a kind of therapy, which is exactly what knitting was for me during October. It really helped me. It kind of prevented me from falling deep into like unpleasant thoughts and from like spiraling, all of that. So I'm really grateful to knitting and the fact that I have my knitting to fall back on. So the first thing I did, I think on the same day when I got the news, was to kind of go through my stash and see what project I can start to cheer me up. And I found this yarn that is actually discontinued. I made a sweater from it before, and when I finished the sweater, I realized that I enjoyed working with it a lot and I wanted to order more, but I found out that it has been discontinued for more than a year, and I just grabbed whatever leftovers I can find. And I was just sitting in my stash for a while. I wanted to make another sweater from it, but I kind of never got around to that. So I found it and I decided to just start doing something. So I started a granny square blanket. I crocheted a blanket. It was something I did basically during that week that I was coming to terms with the fact that, well, my job, which I kind of loved, I would say, is gone now, and I just made granny squares. Fun fact, 3 or like 4 of these I actually made in a movie theater without looking, which was new to me. I've never knit in a movie theater before. And it kind of got me thinking, like, what do people do when they watch movies or like long videos if they don't knit? Like, do they just eat or like sit and watch the thing without keeping their hands occupied? It feels so weird to me as a knitter, because I always knit when I'm watching something, even in the movie theater. If you don't knit and for some reason you're watching this video, what do you do? I'm really interested to know. But anyway, I finished this blanket in around a week and then took some time to kind of sew the granny squares together. And I had a bunch of ends to weave in. It was my first project where I sewed granny squares. And it was not a fun time. It was not a fun time at all, but still it kept me occupied, which I'm really grateful for. And I really love how it looks in the general interior of my room. Oh, I actually pulled out the sweater I originally made from this yarn to show you. And that's this winter cable sweater. This yarn is actually 60% acrylic, but for an acrylic yarn, it doesn't feel acrylic, it feels woolly. So I would highly recommend it if it wasn't discontinued. I also finished my drum shawl, which I showed in my last podcast. As I expected, this border took me forever, but I'm really glad I made it. It's a beautiful pattern, free pattern. And I made it from Alpaca 1, which is a lace weight alpaca from Isager. I don't know what to say about it. I just really love it. It kind of reminds me of those Zontag shawls, like 19th century shawls, really elegant and lightweight, and I intend to wear it quite a lot. So leave your prayers in the comments that it doesn't get makeup stains on it and like dirty finger stains, because it's this beautiful creamy white color. So if I have to wash it and block it again, I would lose my mind, because it took me quite a long time to block out. I think I used more than 100 pins to block it out, but it's really worth it. Originally, this pattern also calls for tassels to be added at the end, but I didn't think I would do that because I was convinced that I would use up all of the yarn I had. I only had 100 grams of this alpaca yarn, but I was pleasantly surprised that I only used like a little bit more than one ball, like 55 grams of this alpaca. So I was excited to make the tassels, but then I decided before I do that, I would see if I can maybe incorporate this alpaca into something else. So what I came up with was this hat. The other yarn is called Selma. It's a hand-dyed sock yarn, which I showed in my first podcast. And I like that I chose to add the alpaca yarn because it makes the colors kind of more muted in a good way. And this is a double layered hat. You kind of fold the one side inside the other, and it also has a fold here. I'm not going to try it on because it will mess up my hair, but I really like this hat. I think I'm gonna sew the fold to the actual hat so it doesn't get all floppy like that. And the thing with double layered hats and me is that I tried to make a few before. It's actually a really simple construction. You just increase and then you make a stockinette tube, and then you decrease and then you kind of fold it in half. Beautiful, really simple, but there will be a point. Usually it's right about here where you will be sick of knitting this hat and you will start convincing yourself that you can start decreasing now, that it's gonna fit. Maybe you will say that it will stretch out with blocking, it'll block out, blah, blah, blah. Don't do it. Please learn from my mistake, because I made not one, but 2 hats like this that ended up being too short. And I only noticed that they are too short after blocking, because I was convincing myself that it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be long, it's too short now, but it's gonna be a beautiful hat. And I already imagine how I would wear this hat and everybody would be asking me, oh my god, where did you get this hat? And I would be like, I knit it myself. Never happened, because the hat is too short. I ended up giving it away, both of them, to people with children, because the hat was so small, so short, it only fit a child. Don't do it. Anyway, with this hat, it all works fine. Maybe it's a little bit too wide, but I don't mind. Like, I would add elastic and it would be a nice oversized warm beanie for the winter. It's a nice hat. Again, kept me occupied. I've also made one of the 2 slippers I need for the slipper tutorial that I promised in my last podcast. Well, not promised, but a lot of people actually replied that they would like to see it. So I'm almost done with it. I just need to film the process of making the second slipper. I think if everything goes well, I will release the tutorial either before this video comes out or right after. So please stay tuned if you're interested. In my last podcast, I showed that I made similar slippers in boucle yarn. So these ones are made in Cascade 220 yarn, which is 100% wool. I'm holding a double and I'm using 5mm needles for it. It's super thick and warm, but at the same time, this wool is not scratchy at all. I actually wanted to make a sweater from Cascade 220 because I found a pattern called Lume, I think. It's for a colorwork sweater, which uses specifically Cascade yarn, but the only place that sells Cascade yarn only had kind of not contrasting colors left in stock, so like dark and dark, or like bright and bright, but they didn't have any really light colors for the contrast to make the colorwork yoke. So I ended up kind of scrapping that idea until I can find a good substitute. And instead I just bought 2 skeins to make the slippers for the tutorial. And when I'm done with the tutorial, these slippers will go to my mom because she is really excited about getting some warm slippers. So stay tuned. And to be honest, I'm still kind of bummed out that I didn't get to make the Lume sweater, because the only store here that carries Cascade 220 actually had a quite big selection of colors, but as I said, they had no contrast between them, and I really tried to make it work. I actually like combined all of the colors that they had in a collage and like tried to make it black and white and see which colors have contrast between them, at the same time kind of keeping in mind which colors I would enjoy wearing. And it took me a whole evening because I have nothing to do now. I have a lot of time now, so at the end of the evening I just gave up and was like, okay, fine, I'm just gonna keep it in the back of my mind until I either see that this yarn is sold again or they restock, which probably will not happen anytime soon, or until if I find a good substitution. Speaking of yarns that are really hard to find, I managed to grab 2 plates of this Plottulopi yarn, which is Icelandic unspun wool. As with the Cascade yarn, the only store that sells this yarn in Ukraine had it on clearance. I don't think they will restock anytime soon. I just grabbed it because I really wanted to try knitting with unspun yarn. I heard a lot of good things about it, and it's kind of bittersweet because I'm so happy I tried it. I loved working with it. I'm going to show you the project I made in a second, but at the same time, it was very sad because I realized I can't get more of it. I can't get all of the colors I want, and I'm nowhere near my dream of knitting a traditional Icelandic like colorwork sweater, which is called Lopi, I think. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But what I managed to make from it was a hat. Fell on the floor, of course. I made this hat, which is from a pattern called Tsov by Kathleen Hunter. And this is a beautiful hat. I was kind of worried that the cable and stitch definition would not be visible on the really kind of woolly, unspun, dark yarn, but I think it looks really good. Actually, in real life, it looks much better than it shows on camera. I'm just so in love with this yarn and this hat. I wore it quite a few times already when it was really rainy and cold, and it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. I had a lot of fun knitting it. I think I finished it in like 2 evenings, and I made small modifications to the pattern to make it fit the yarn I have, to make it work with the unspun. I held the yarn double because I heard a lot that it's hard to make the unspun yarn work when you're working on 1 ply because it will split a lot and it can be hard to work with. But at the same time, even though it splits quite a lot, especially if you're tugging on your yarn, it's really easy to graft it back together, or not graft, I'm sorry, it's called a splice. You can splice it together quite easily. So I don't know what to say. I'm looking at this hat and I'm so in love with this yarn and this pattern and how it came together. I used bigger needles than suggested in the pattern. I think pattern calls for 4.5mm needles and I used 5mm. I'm not gonna try it on again because it will mess up my hair, but I really, really love it. Did I mention that I love this hat and this yarn? And because I really enjoyed making the Tsov hat, I think the pattern is really well written and it went by really quickly. I decided to make another one. This time in a lighter yarn to see how the cables would look in a lighter color. And I haven't gotten really far, as you can see. I just did the ribbing. So I'm gonna keep you posted on how it goes, or probably you will see it on Ravelry as a finished project at some point. And the yarn I'm using for it is a sock yarn, which is Regia Cashmere, and a strand of silk mohair. I think these yarns look really well together, even though they're kind of different color. By the way, I wouldn't recommend this yarn as a sock yarn on its own because it's on the pricier side, but at the same time, I made socks from it before and it got really bobbly and like started pilling really, really fast. So I can't recommend this yarn on its own, but with silk mohair for garments or accessories, it's a good choice. Coming back to the Icelandic yarn, I searched everywhere because, as I said, I fell in love with this yarn. It was like, it was made specifically for me because I'm not sensitive to scratchiness at all. I don't feel the itch. I don't feel any sensitivity on my skin when I put on something made from like really rustic or itchy yarn. I searched everywhere and I couldn't find more of it. No stores, to my knowledge, sell it anymore, in Ukraine that is. But I found one woman who I wish all the happiness in the world. She was decluttering her yarn stash and she was selling, get ready for this, she was selling her Icelandic yarn leftovers, and I got, one second, I got all of this from her for like 15 bucks, all of this and also this. So like I'm still speechless. She had a huge stash or like leftover stash of Plottulopi and also Lettlopi, which is a thicker version of this yarn, which is specifically used for those Icelandic Lopi sweaters. And it's one of the best gifts I've ever received, I think. I still need to figure out which colors I can use, like what color combination I can make up from the yarns I have. I have about 250 grams of white, so my base color will be white, and everything else I'll need to figure out based on like which colors I can combine together. And I'm planning to actually make a separate video about it because it's going to be too much to get into here, but maybe it's not the colors I wanted. Maybe I wouldn't make the base color white if I could, but if I had a choice. But still, I'm really grateful to her and I'm really excited to finally make that sweater I really want. And the thing is, she put this one leftover ball of Alafosslopi yarn, which is much thicker than everything else here, and I didn't know what to make from it, but then I remembered that I have this never-ending project and I added a border of this green color to my granny stitch blanket, and I think it looks really nice. Now it looks finished, finally. I wish I had more of this yarn. It's really beautiful. The colorway is called Green Apple, which is perfect for it, but I'll keep you posted on how it goes with the Icelandic sweater. I hope it's gonna work out. So what else I can show you? Yes, I have one more finished project. This was actually a UFO, really similar to the sweater I showed you before, the one made from discontinued yarn. It's a pattern I came up with myself, like freestyled myself, and I started it back in January or February, I don't remember, but I had an idea to maybe write down a pattern for it, and I knit it until this point where the marker is, but then I got COVID and I kind of forgot about it, and then I forgot which needles I used because I pulled out the needles. It was in my UFO pile until like last week, I think. Well, actually I don't have a UFO pile. It was a sweater sized UFO pile because I usually finish my projects pretty quickly unless the seasons are changing and I kind of set aside my summer projects to work on something warmer instead. But I felt so dumb because, as I showed you, it was almost done. I just needed to add a few centimeters to the body and then do the ribbing, and it took me like less than 2 hours to do. But I guess it's just how knitting goes, you know, it's a knitting circle of life, circle of knitting, where you start a project and then somehow it becomes a UFO. You either forget about it or you set it aside indefinitely, and then you find it like 6 months later and you realize that all you needed to do was like this much work to make it into a finished object. And then you kind of swear that you will never do that again, but then another project comes along which has the same situation happen to it, and I swear that I will never do this again, that I will finish my project sooner, but it's probably not gonna happen. Probably something will become a UFO. I think that's all for the finished projects. I have a few works in progress to show you. So you can congratulate me because I finally started the Alfred sweater. Look at this beauty. It's actually not an Alfred sweater, it's kind of an Alfred's cousin sweater because my gauge was way off. I tried to make it work, but this pattern has a really simple but weird construction. So you cast on a lot of stitches for the neck, like much more than you would think is going to be needed for like a child's neckband size. But then you add an elastic so it kind of stretches. So it's a lot of stitches here, and then it's a really simple raglan increase without any shaping, without short rows, and then you kind of separate it for the body and sleeves. And I tried to cast it on it because my stitch gauge was much thicker than here. I think the original gauge was like 32 stitches per 10 centimeters, but mine was like 25. I tried to kind of calculate it and I cast on, and it felt too big even for like my neck. I just gave up and I just cast on the amount of stitches I would need to fit my nephew's neckband and just kind of almost freestyled from there. So it's going to be very similar to the Alfred sweater, and I do follow the pattern, but at the same time I can't say that it's an accurate representation of how the sweater should look. So, and also a quick note about these needles. These are Knit Pro Ginger, I think they're called, and they might be one of my favorite needles, not just DPNs, but like my favorite needles to work with, hands down. They are wooden, but not bamboo, so they're not as flimsy and you don't feel like you're gonna break them if you're like holding onto them too hard. And also they come in a pack of 6, which is, I think, a requirement for every pack of double-pointed needles, because people like me tend to lose double-pointed needles and then find them like a decade later under the couch. So it's nice to have a backup. Plus, one time I actually lost a DPN because I was knitting in a bus. I was like in a long haul bus, and the needle fell kind of in between the seat somewhere where I couldn't get to it and like couldn't retrieve it. I think that needle is still on that bus. I hope it's having a good time traveling. That's all I can say. So guess who just ran out of storage? Didn't realize it until filming for about 15 more minutes. And then when clearing the storage, realized that it's getting dark like minute by minute and the lighting is basically gone. So did you guess it? Yes, it was me. So the last project I wanted to show you is this cardigan that I started. This is the kind of front and back panel, which I'm knitting at the same time. And this pattern is called Korshavn cardigan. And I really wanted to try knitting something with this basket stitch pattern. Don't laugh at me, but for the longest time I thought that this kind of basket texture is worked kind of in the same way as entrelac. But turns out it's not even remotely as complicated as just knits and purls. So probably like one of the easiest texture stitch patterns you can do. So as soon as I found that out, I was like, no, I want to try knitting a garment using this stitch pattern. And it was a tie between this cardigan and another pattern called Belfair, which is actually a sweater pattern, and I decided that a cardigan would be much more useful because I have like a million sweaters that I knit myself already, and I only have 2 cardigans, so I'm making a cardigan. Maybe I'll be able to find some cute buttons to go with it to make it kind of more interesting. I don't know, but I love how the fabric looks so far. I'm combining 2 yarns. The first one is this hand-dyed yarn. It's called Gazzal Wool Star. It's a Turkish brand, and it's a superwash merino that is hand-dyed, but it doesn't have that much of a variegation. It's just kind of a variegated shade of the same color. I don't know. As you can see, I'm all about the beige. I don't really know a lot about colors. It's called Tortoiseshell, which is the cutest name. I have a tortie cat, and before her, I also had another tortie cat, so Tortoiseshell is perfect for me. And I'm pairing it with this yarn, which looks like silk mohair, but it's actually a silk and alpaca blend on like a nylon string as opposed to a silk strand. And this is from a Ukrainian brand, Yarna. This yarn is called Aria. And the weird thing about it, like, it's really nice, really soft, good to work with, but when I received it, I realized that in the actual ball, like, the strand is already, it has 2 strands. It's like a 2-ply, or like 2 strands wound together. And this confused me because on here it says that it has 187 meters, but is it like for 1 strand, or, and like when I have them together, it's actually like half of that meterage, or is it for this ball specifically? I just hope I have enough. I didn't know that I would be making this cardigan specifically with this yarn, so I bought quite a lot. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. It's really soft and it looks much better. Like, the color looks much better in a nicer lighting. So if I catch the sun tomorrow, I'm gonna insert a video somewhere of how the color actually looks. And with that, I think that's actually all I wanted to talk about. I really hope that you enjoyed our chat today and maybe managed to do some progress on what you are knitting or crocheting. I wish you a very good day or evening or morning, whatever you're having. And if you feel like it, you can subscribe so you can check out more of my videos when they come out. You can expect to see more of me because I have a lot of free time now. And usually when I have free time, I just either knit or think about knitting or talk about knitting. So I think it's a win-win for whoever wants to subscribe. Yes, I knit this myself. Yes, it was a very special technique.